Introduction. Frank Kepple's posts on the Astral Pulse forums are a valuable resource for those serious about exploring their inner worlds and gaining control over their dreams. The posts span several years and, when read in sequence, provide a transcript of Frank's progress towards a mastery of lucid dreaming. Although not everyone may agree with his particular worldview and theories on the afterlife, his posts contain many insights into the process of conscious transition into the world of lucid dreams. This document represents a selection of his posts dealing with the practical side of lucid dreaming. It focuses entirely on how to achieve the state he calls astral projection, and omits any discussions of his experiences there or of his theories on the nature of reality. The posts are organized by topic and relevance rather than by date. I hope this document is of use to anyone exploring this challenging and rewarding endeavor. Starting out, Monroe Institute's Wave series, is it worth it? Naturally, I cannot say whether Wave 1 would definitely work for one particular person. What I do know is that for a beginner, the myriad of different techniques out there must be so darned confusing. For most of these people, it must surely be a case of wondering, where the heck do I begin? As far as astral dynamics is concerned, while I agree that it is a darned good book that contains a lot of useful information, it's obvious that Robert is into doing all kinds of energy work. As such, to a complete beginner, simply wanting to learn how to do controlled conscious exit projections, I'd say that astral dynamics goes a bit overboard technique-wise. Again, that is why I like Wave 1 so much, as it gives a total novice a very simple and structured plan to work to, and it is recorded in a very effective format. It's one thing reading about something in a book, but it comes across on a CD so much more effectively. But is it worth $100? In this capitalist system of ours, pricing is largely determined by what the target market can stand. Personally, I believe AD would still be worth the money at 5x the price I paid. But book publishing is a highly competitive sector to the extent where the market simply wouldn't stand it. But the Monroe Institute seem to have created a nice earner for themselves in the form of the Gateway Series CDs. After all, they are that price, because they can sell at that price, which is amazing considering $99 for a 5-cent CD. That's a brilliant markup, a useful guide into the unknown. I'm not a big fan of the Monroe Institute, and I have said on another post that their way of doing things is all a bit touchy-feely for my tastes, but each to their own. What I do know is, for an OB beginner, one of the biggest stumbling blocks is knowing exactly what to do at each step of the way. Point being, these people need to get into some kind of ritual that they can practice each day. Now, it's one thing reading a book, but it's quite another having quality recorded guidance. That's what Wave 1, CD 1 gives you. It's a specific count from C1, normal physical consciousness, through to Focus 10, mind awake, body asleep. It's done very professionally, and I'm a great fan of it because it has been the core help in my original efforts to slow down what was my usual projection process, which was basically the feeling of being shot from a cannon 3 times a week on average to someplace on the astral somewhere. The CD does not induce an OB. That's the brilliant part about it. All it does is set the stage and leaves it up to you to play your part. I'm not sure where the hemisync technology aspect comes into it either. There are subtle sounds on the tape, but are mainly in the background. What you hear mainly is Bob Monroe's voice guiding you through the various steps. I only recommend Wave 1 CD 1. It's all you really need. Because the rest, the average person could discover for themselves through interaction with others on this BBS. At Focus 10, you are right on the brink between human physical consciousness and the start of the astral. This state has made it possible for me to contact guides with a much higher degree of reliability, and for the past couple of months, I have been practicing channeling information while at the Focus 10 state, again with excellent results. Get to Focus 10 with Wave 1. The Wave 1 CD 1 teaches you how to bring your awareness to the Focus 10 state. After a while, you learn to be able to do this by yourself, i.e. without the CD. What I do is each morning listen to Wave 1 CD 1, Track 2, a couple of times, just to get me in the mood. Then I go through the process without the CD. At Focus 10, you are right on the border of the astral. All it takes from there is a little mental push and you are in. Track 1 gives you some prelims that you only need to go through once or twice. Quote, I don't want to take much of your time, but I am particularly interested in this quote. At Focus 10, you are right on the brink between human physical consciousness and the start of the astral. This state has made it possible for me to contact guides with a much higher degree of reliability. And for the past couple of months, I have been practicing channeling information while at the Focus 10 state, again with excellent results. Are you saying that you are attaining better results than OBE? And also, what sort of information are you channeling and from whom? A resounding yes. At the moment, I am practicing putting out mental questions over the astral from the Focus 10 state. Then I leave myself open to receive the answer. It's still hit and miss because I only recently began trying this. Again, it was my being able to reliably get myself to Focus 10 that opened up the possibility to try new things in a controlled way. Your goal should be Focus 12. I only ever used Wave 1 as I found that did all I needed at the time. My main difficulty in achieving a controlled conscious exit projection was achieving the Focus 12 state. Once I'd reached this state, then everything would roll more or less by itself from there. I would say that Focus 10 and Focus 12 of the Monroe model are the essential prerequisite states. In my opinion, the rest of the series are a bit of a commercial exercise. If you can achieve a definite Focus 12, then you should be able to reach Focus 21 with little difficulty. From there, the non-physical world's your oyster, so to speak. Any kind of CD going off in your ears wouldn't make any difference, as you wouldn't be physical to hear it. Unless you switch to an overlay experience, but what's the point? Then you'd be listening to a CD, so-called, taking you to a place you'd be at already. So if I were you, I'd concentrate more on the beginning CDs and try to reach a definite Focus 12, and you should find the experience takes on a life of its own. Mental rundown and process tips. I've had a number of PMs asking similar questions about my comments regarding the mental rundown given on the Monster thread as being a kind of primer which kickstarts the natural phasing process. The questions relate to how you integrate the two and kickstart the process, how can you tell when the process has been kickstarted, and what to do then, etc. So I thought I'd post a reply here as it pertains to the thread title. What is the purpose of creating a mental rundown? The rundown acts as a kind of mental primer, which gets you in the mood and increases your anticipation and expectation levels. Very important. The rundown is not what causes you to phase to the astral. Phasing is a natural process which comes about under certain mental conditions, which I expand on later in this essay. It also gives a person practice in focusing their attention away from the physical body into the expanse of their mind. In other words, what you are basically doing is imagining you are phasing to the astral. What shall I try and for how long and how often? The mental rundown exercise should be performed preferably at least once each day at around the same time. It does not really matter what kind of mental rundown you use. Simply do whatever feels right for you. Someone posted fairly recently, they tried to work out their own, but gave up and used the example I gave, with a few changes here and there. Others have created their own from scratch. Like I say, it truly does not matter. You don't actually need the Wave 1 CD either. You can formulate a mental rundown to some relaxing music, or create something using Brainwave Generator, or use whatever suits you. All I would advise is for you to create something of around 30 to 45 minutes duration, which you're basically happy with, then stick with it. In other words, don't make it too short or too long, and no chopping and changing. Okay, I've formulated a mental rundown, so what next? Once you have learnt your mental rundown, you are ready to use it as a mental primer. First you go through it, then simply remove the earphones, if you are using a CD or tape, and try phasing for real. In cases where you perhaps haven't got all that much time to spare, what I would suggest is you create a short version of your rundown, say around half the duration. Then, every other time listen to the short version, after which you try for real. Once you get more competent, then perhaps switch to the short version each morning. Or maybe try a regime of rundown one day and try it for real with no rundown the next. Again, it truly is a case of whatever suits each individual. What do you mean by phasing for real? When you come to phase for real, you switch from perceiving mental imagery you are imagining as part of your rundown i.e., where you are imagining you are phasing to the astral, to perceiving images that are being created as part of the normal phasing process. In other words, you are not imagining anything, you are doing it. After going through my rundown, I try it for real and nothing happens. Why? Chances are, your physical body is distracting you by capturing your attention. One of the benefits of formulating a mental rundown to some kind of audio recording is it takes your mind off both the physical body and the physical environment. Plus, you know exactly what imagery to perceive as it is you who is imagining it. Without these two mental props, it can feel like you are right back at square one. Main things you should avoid when trying for real. Thinking about day-to-day physical realm matters. Any kind of thinking about anything to do with the physical realm tends to put a big spoke in the works. In other words, you can't really hope to kickstart the phasing process if one part of you is thinking of your dental appointment next day, or whether you'll get that pay raise you requested, or your birthday next week, etc., etc. To deal with this, what you should do, right at the start of your practice, is imagine a large box and place all your physical realm concerns in that box. Then lock it securely and walk away. When you finish your mental rundown, unlock the box and take them out again. This method is suggested by Monroe on the Wave 1 CD. It may sound a bit weird, but it works. Any kind of internally verbalized thought, even if it is to do with phasing. What I mean here is, you need to switch your inner thinking so it is working exclusively in a visual way. Speed reading aside, when we read to ourselves, we have this inner voice which reads the words. This voice is probably what you are listening to within your own mind right now as you read this. Also, when we think to ourselves in an everyday sense, we tend to use this same inner voice. Like you may think, I've got 30 minutes before I meet my next client, so I'll go and fill the car with petrol and pick up something to eat on the way back. Thinking that way uses that same inner voice, which must be silent. Then you quietly and passively observe what happens next. When I say quietly, I mean observe without having that inner voice comment on anything you may perceive. When I say passively, I mean avoid reacting in any way to anything you may perceive. Both the above I realize are a tad tricky to do. The good news is, it all comes good with practice. At first, what will probably happen is you might perceive some kind of vague, fleeting image, at which point your inner voice will chirp up saying, "What was that?" Or it might make some other comment. Perhaps it may comment in recognition that you are making progress. Problem is, as it does so, it tends to send you a step back each time. Unfortunately, you can get caught in a self-defeating loop, where you take one step forward, your inner voice recognizes you just took a step forward and comments to that effect, and the act of it doing so takes you one step back to where you were before. Or you might perceive something and react to it. You might get startled or fearful or such like. What used to happen to me all the time, which was most frustrating, is I'd perceive some image in mind, and the moment I did so, my physical eyes would try and snatch a glance at whatever it was. This, of course, zapped me right back to C1 each time. Okay, so you are in a state where you are quietly and passively observing. Don't worry if nothing comes about. Simply curtail the session after your normal time and try again next session. Hopefully, what will soon happen is you will begin to perceive what may seem like fairly weird, totally abstract mental imagery. Say you perceive some fleeting kind of something or other. Chances are you'll wonder if what you think you may have perceived is what you should be starting to perceive. Then you'll realize your inner voice has just made a comment. But the realization of that was yet another comment, by which time you'll probably be right back where you started. The key is to simply roll along with this mental imagery without your inner voice commenting on it or having your physical body reacting to it. This is the beginning of phasing. You don't need any particular technique in order to project. You just need to set it going. Once the process gets underway, everything happens more or less automatically. If you can just quietly and passively observe the process, you will end up within the astral as awake and alert as you normally are while within the physical. Some rundown examples. You have hit on the very reason why I call it looking from a distance, and that's what I am calling a third-person view. But I realize that my definition is not strictly correct. Technically, it can come across as not quite true third person, but more like actual first-person view, but looking from a distance. With some people, it can be a true third person, however. Okay, regarding the sense question, let's choose a simple rundown. You are sitting at a table, peeling potatoes. Right, so you'll be lying in bed, aware of your physical body. Yet in your mind, you will be imagining there is another you who is sitting at a table peeling potatoes. Now, chances are this image will not be too clear at first. If you're like most people, you will sense the image that you are creating, rather than actually see it. All you will likely be seeing is the blackness behind your closed eyes. So the image of this other you will be indistinct and hazy, and none of it will make much sense. Now what we do is start to engage the senses of the you who you are creating in your imagination. Remember, your imagination is where you want to go to. Your imagination is situated within focus 2 of consciousness. Once you are there, you can use F2OC as a launch pad to get you to focus 3 or focus 4. Alternatively, you can stay within focus 2 and have a nosy around, or you can come away towards the physical and have an RTZ experience. It's entirely up to you. But first you have to get yourself within focus 2. And to do that, we need to initiate the switch. So what you do is look at the table that you imagine this imaginary you is sitting at, see the wood it is made from, and feel the texture of it. In other words, engage the senses of the imaginary you sitting at that table. It may not be a wooden table, it may be plastic. The detail is yours to decide and to imagine. You are not engaging the senses of your physical body lying on the bed, but the physical senses of the you who you are creating sitting at that table in your mind. Doing that causes you to be more creative and shifts your focus of attention towards this imaginary person. So you've felt the table, and to the side of you is a bucket of potatoes, and to the other side of you is another bucket with water in it. On the table is a peeling knife. What color is the handle? See the color, pick up the knife, and feel it in the person's hand. Again, you are not feeling it with your own physical hand. The hand doing the feeling is the hand of the imaginary person you are creating in your mind. Take one of the potatoes from the bucket and start to peel it. How does it smell? What sound does the knife make as it shaves off the potato skin? When you have finished peeling, then plop the potato in the bucket with the water. Did you hear the splash? Are you getting what I mean now? The idea is to create something not too elaborate, but not something so simple that you get bored and fall asleep or give up. Make it something that you enjoy doing, something simple that you can engage your senses, but make it a little repetitive so you can progressively build on the imagery, but not so repetitive that it becomes tedious and boring. In a rundown example published the other day, a member built a log cabin for himself. This kind of thing is ideal because you have a series of repetitive actions, but you are building something at the same time, which makes it far more interesting than merely doing some repetitive action on its own. The more you practice this, the closer you will get to initiating the switch. This happens when your focus of attention is captured by the imaginary imagery. You actually become the person you are imagining. Or you may end up in the same room as them and start talking to one another. This is kind of freaky when it first happens, lol, but you quickly get used to it. Initially it's a little shocking, or at least it can be. Suddenly, it'll be you sitting there peeling the potatoes within the same non-physical reality you were previously imagining from a distance. At which point you'll think, hang about, I'm not imagining this. This realization will tend to shock you out of the state. But after a few attempts, you get used to it, and you'll be able to remain where you are. Once you are comfortable remaining in the state, then you can change your perception slightly, and you'll see the current scenery give way to something else. Then you can practice doing this for a while. Don't try actually moving around. Just stand still and practice changing your perception and having your environment change to suit. The big mistake people make is they immediately go flying off here and there. Unfortunately, doing that just creates havoc that can quickly get out of control, and all manner of misunderstandings can arise in your mind about the nature of the environment. People tend to want to travel to places in the normal physical sense, so they set off walking, lol. But the secret to successful navigation of focus 2 of consciousness is realizing you don't have to travel anywhere. You experience things by simply standing or sitting still and changing your perception. In other words, have your environment come to you rather than you trying to go to it. Straightforward rundown suggestions. An excellent experience that highlights a number of important issues. Firstly, you say that you didn't think it could be so easy. Perhaps easy is not quite the word I should be using in my narrative. Maybe straightforward would be more apt for the point I wish to make. Obviously, it's going to be easier for some people more than others, but that doesn't change the straightforwardness of the whole thing. For a while now, I have steadfastly maintained that this whole issue has been unnecessarily complicated by layer upon layer of mystical crud that has infected this topic to the extent where there is no longer any cure. To me, it's like a rampaging cancer, where the only option left is to simply cut the whole thing out in order to try and get rid of it. When you do that, and you learn the basic structure of the wider reality, about how each person truly relates to that wider reality, everything becomes much more straightforward. The other important point your post exemplifies is the fact that the best mental rundown to make the switch from focus 1 to focus 2 of consciousness is simply the rundown that is the best for you. One of the most popular questions I get is, Frank, what's the best rundown to use? Problem is, all the empirical evidence I have to date would strongly indicate that there is no universal best. There are, however, certain factors that stand out as being more beneficial than others. I can say that what you need is something fairly simple and repetitive but interesting at the same time. If it's too repetitive, then you'll get bored and either give up or fall asleep. But make it too complicated and you'll lose the thread of it all. You need to engage your senses to as high a degree as possible, but make it personal and direct. Someone said the other week about engaging their hearing by imagining a bird singing in the distance. Well, that's a start, but it's not really all that engaging. Why not play a drum? That way you get a sense of feeling, sound, and sight, and it's direct. All you need now is to chew some gum while you are doing it to get even your sense of taste involved. And hey, presto, you'll be making the switch before you know it. Bouncing on a trampoline is ideal. Perhaps not everyone's thing, but it's very engaging all the same. In other words, it's a fun thing to do. It's a full-on, in-your-face kind of activity, and it directly engages the senses. The other point I wish to stress, I've just touched on in the paragraph above, which is the fun aspect. I don't what it is about all these mystical and other religious notions. To me, it's almost like anyone wanting to take a more traditional course has to first have a total humor bypass in order to qualify. Your rundown should be directly engaging, and it also should be fun. Not frivolous, and I want to stress this, we are not engaging in some frivolous act. But it should be fun, all the same. But again, I am doubly stressing because I don't want anyone getting the idea that we don't take any of this seriously. I, for one, take this topic very seriously. It has been a part of my life for over 20 years, so I take it seriously, all right? But I also have fun while I'm doing it. The other point you exemplify is the way people are typically jolted out of the state the moment they step into it. Often, it is the case that you get jolted out of it so fast that you only really realize that you had made the transition to focus 2 after you get jolted back to focus 1. You are left lying there thinking back to a moment ago, realizing you had stepped into your rundown and got zapped out of it. Normally, the excitement of realizing you made the switch prevents you from making any further attempts that session. After a while of practice, actual time varies from person to person, you become comfortable with the process to the extent where you no longer get zapped out of it. Once you are comfortable in making the switch to focus 2, then the next step is to learn how to transition to focus 3, as that's where all the fun stuff is. The transition to focus 3 is not all that difficult. But like the transition to focus 2, it just takes a little practice. Overall, it is not the actual doing that is difficult, and your post is a perfect example of that, even considering you are not exactly a complete beginner. I think the most difficult aspect of this whole thing has been coming to the realization of what the wider reality actually entails, rather than trying to sift through all the varying beliefs about what the wider reality entails. Once you realize the structure and that there is a focus 2, a focus 3, and a focus 4, and what you have to do in order to phase to these areas, Though everyone, please let's put aside F4 for a while, as it's mighty complex. We'll stick to F2 and F3 for now. Then the actual doing isn't all that difficult. Again, strip away all the mystical beliefs that have clouded the simplicity of it all, and people will be phasing for fun in no time. Well, that's what I sincerely hope. Engage your senses during your rundown. Yes, I always recommend that when you create the mental rundown, you will make the switch from third person to first person much quicker and/or more reliably if you simultaneously engage a number of physical senses in the rundown. Smell, I have found, is a powerful one with me. I love to imagine smelling freshly baked bread. I imagine an old country kitchen with an Aga-style stove, and there's a freshly baked loaf on the top cooling off. Even just typing this, I can smell it within me and I want to go to it. Lol. So you will also make better progress if you imagine something you enjoy doing. Well, apart from the obvious, of course, sex, I have found, has a very powerful pull, but it has the detrimental effect of also engaging the physical. The two can easily end up in conflict, i.e., the physical is pulling you one way and your non-physical rundown is pulling you the other, so to speak, and you end up locked in the middle of them. Music is another powerful one I find, particularly flute. I imagine I can hear a distant flute, and it's getting closer and closer. Before I know it, I've turned a corner in my mind, and I come across the someone who is playing. This kind of technique is great for transitioning directly to Focus 3, where you engage a rundown with a party unknown. It's kind of freaky coming across them. The first time I tried the flute idea, I suddenly found myself in the company of a person playing. As I approached, they stopped playing to introduce themselves, and we started chatting. Then I suddenly realized, hang on a minute, I'm not imagining this, at which point I realized I had transitioned to Focus 3, not Focus 2 as I had originally planned. It's a very powerful technique, engaging a party unknown, and you can quite easily phase shift directly to F3 from using it. But I don't recommend it for beginners. Unfortunately, it's all too easy to create an aspect of yourself within F2OC, and you engage yourself in a kind of facsimile experience. In other words, you engage in a scenario you create within F2, rather than engaging in an interaction with someone separate to yourself within F3. Once you have a little experience of F3, then it's easy to tell the difference, but quite tricky if you haven't. Many traditionalists who try to engage in the objective action of viewing one's higher self, for example, create all manner of aspects of themselves within F2OC as a result. They think they've gone off on some deep meaning journey and found God and all that kind of thing, and they are just engaging in wish fulfillment actions within F2OC. So generally you need to be careful you aren't fooled when meeting people. We all have many other aspects of ourselves within F2OC. We each hold an enormous number of belief constructs. We create all manner of shrines to our likes and dislikes, etc., etc. So it's very easy to be sucked in, and before you know it, you'll be chewing crystals for breakfast and going to work in a manure-powered car. I'm just kidding on the latter. But many people, you can tell from some of the stuff they write, that what they are doing is engaging aspects of their own self within F2OC without realizing it. Not that there is anything wrong in engaging aspects of your own self. It's great fun, and there's nothing wrong with a nice bit of wish fulfillment. The key is whether you actually realize and know whether that's what you are doing or not. You can engage in some mock battle between all manner of demons and devils, for example, if that is your thing. Severe problems can arise, however, when people come to believe, as millions have done in the past, that those demons and devils have a kind of reality of their own. So at first, it is probably best to keep your rundown very simple and perhaps not try to reach too far too quickly, so to speak. Focus 2 of consciousness can be used as a handy launch pad to the other areas quite easily, so there is no disadvantage in phase shifting from F1 to F2 first, then aiming for F3. Rundown. Engage all of your physical senses. I have come to realize that I automatically engage my physical senses within the rundown to a higher extent that possibly most people might. So I'm thinking now that perhaps I should have dwelt on this aspect more in my original post. The problems you highlight in your sections 1, 2, and 4, I believe have the same cause and therefore the same solution. What I have to say also touches on what Sarah advises in her reply. In my original postings, I do say for you not to get too carried away with the visualization aspect. All you need to do is create the bare structure. Remember, you are in an environment where thoughts become things. So if you start visualizing to a great extent, then this can cause all kinds of unexpected problems. For example, parts of the scenery you create may suddenly begin taking on a life of their own, and that kind of thing. So keeping it all fairly abstract avoids many of the potential problems. Now, when you create a scenario, you need to engage all your physical senses. And this is the aspect I perhaps should have placed more emphasis on in my original post. Because I realize now that I automatically engage my physical senses to a high degree, and I rather assumed without really thinking about it that other people were basically the same. And it appears that they are not. When you create the structure of your rundown, you only need to create just enough detail to engage your senses, no more and no less. In other words, you need to see your immediate surroundings, smell the flowers, feel the cool breeze on your skin, hear the birds singing, and so forth. But you don't want to create something too detailed that you get lost in the creation of it. For example, when I say, hear the birds singing, I don't mean for you to create a line of trees full of nesting starlings and all the mummy birds are keeping the eggs warm while all the daddy birds are catching the worms and so forth. All I mean is, just imagine somewhere in the distance you can hear birds singing, and the sound of that is drifting over to you from somewhere. In other words, you hear the sound without creating all the rest of the scenario. So like I say, just enough to engage the action of your senses within you. The key aspect is to engage your physical senses, because this aspect is what makes it work. Engaging your physical senses within you is what tends to have the effect of focusing your attention inwards. So you need enough detail to engage all your senses, no more and no less. You'll find, I am sure, that the more you engage your physical senses within the rundown, the more easily you will find it maintaining a first-person perspective. This is what you should be aiming to maintain. I've experimented with all manner of mental rundowns since my beginning with the Wave 1 CD. What I found was the success of any rundown was dependent on the degree to which I could engage the experiencing of my physical senses within the rundown. As I say, I do believe that the problems you highlight in your sections 1, 2, and 4 are caused by your failing to engage your senses to the requisite degree. It does take practice, I admit. Perhaps what you might want to try doing is going through a rundown where you mainly concentrate on just one sense only. Once you get the hang of that, then switch to another sense, and then another, and so forth, until you are familiar with bringing each sense into the forefront of your awareness. You will probably find you are stronger on some senses than others. With me, I'm very visual, but my other senses are quite strong as well. Once you have practiced using individual senses, start going through your rundown using pairs of senses, and gradually work through to the point where you can handle all 5 at once. At which point you cannot help but be in a solid first-person perspective. As regards your problem highlighted in your section 3, I believe you are taking this too literally in a physical sense. You should be thinking more in terms of entering a mental space within you, not thinking of moving upwards in terms of physical space, like imagining anything above your physical head or anything like that. The place where you go is upwards into the expanse of your mind, not up in the sense of physically upwards. The good news is, regarding your Focus 10 experiences, you are absolutely right on track. Focus 10 is exactly like where your attention is focused elsewhere, to the extent where you are not thinking of your physical body at all. Of course, the moment you think about it, you instantly become aware of it again. At which point you realize that a moment ago you weren't feeling it, and then the realization dawns that you just broke the state you worked so hard to get into in the first place. Problem is, a person cannot actively not think of the physical, because the more you try to not think about it, the more you think about it, and the more you think about it, the more your attention is captured by it. Like if someone is lying down and they think, I wonder if my physical is relaxed yet, instantly they are snapped out of whatever mental state they had previously achieved, and the physical body comes to the forefront of their awareness again. The only way around this is to focus away from the physical and concentrate on something else, to the point where it captures your focus of attention. That's the reason for engaging your physical senses within you during the rundown, because doing that greatly helps to hold your attention to the degree necessary to capture your attention and hold your focus. The physical grounds us to a high degree. In other words, it commands our attention and holds our focus like a powerful magnet. If you have two magnets, one powerful and the other weak, and you place a piece of iron at the center of them, the iron will go in the direction of the stronger pull. Imagine your focus of attention as that piece of iron. At the moment, your physical is that strong magnet. What you need to do is weaken the pull of the physical by allowing it to relax, i.e., shutting down your outer senses. This weakens the attraction of being in the physical. After all, what is there to focus on but the backs of your eyelids? What you do next is create a more interesting set of circumstances within you, i.e., your mental rundown, which will attract your focus of attention. What you do, in effect, is present your focus of attention with a choice between either 1, staring at the backs of your eyelids, or 2, gravitating towards this engaging scenario upstairs. Mental rundown, remove physical focus. The mental rundown is used as a kind of practice session, after which the person tries for real. It serves the purpose of getting a person into the habit of focusing their attention within themselves. Problem is, when someone is a complete beginner, it is difficult for them to spark the process off. People try and look within and see nothing. In the event, they just get disheartened thinking they can't do it. Which is why I suggest for people to first create an imaginary scenario. Then, after a while, situations will come about where you snap out of it thinking, "Hang on a minute, that wasn't on my script." Slowly but surely, a person will get used to these unexpected situations, so they will be able to just passively observe them. At this point, a person crosses the bridge between just imagining and shifting their focus of attention for real. Myself, I never think in terms of relaxing the physical body, or stilling the mind, or entering a kind of trance state. I think all that is more to do with meditation rather than astral projection. I think of it more in terms of mental focus. When you focus your attention within yourself, you automatically lose contact with your physical body. When you focus on a specific mental rundown, then you automatically drop all the day-to-day mental tittle-tattle that people can become preoccupied with. And as I've mentioned before a number of times, I cannot understand what people mean by trance state. I'm not knocking these concepts. The notion of entering a trance state or doing specific physical relaxation exercises and so forth may well work for some people. But with me, like I say, it all boils down to where you focus your attention. Gateway Wave 1, full rundown. There's 2 people currently on this BBS who have listened to the Wave 1 CD without much progress, and I suspect there may be more who have long since lobbed them to the back of a drawer somewhere after listening to the CDs without having any real results. Now, I find that strange because for me, the Wave 1 CD has been a very effective tool in my efforts to gain control over the exit process and to try and work out where Monroe is coming from when he speaks about phasing in to the astral, instead of doing like I used to, for example, which was the feeling of being shot from a cannon and landing within the astral somewhere, with no real control whatsoever. Now, I know myself pretty well by now, and I know for a fact that I do not have any natural talent for this OB stuff. I make the point because someone could say the reason why I'm successful is because I have a natural talent for projection and so forth. Not a bit. All my gains are hard-fought, let me assure you. Though, in hindsight, I feel it is because I have no real talent for things of this nature. I've been forced to use my imagination to quite a high degree. It was when I read the following that I suddenly thought where people may be going wrong. P.S. Frank's quote, "Okay, tell me, what are you imagining when you go from the energy conversion box to focus 3? In my case, I was trying to concentrate on an image that I could see behind my eyelids. I think that Mr. Jeff Mash mentioned this in one of his posts. Concentrating on an image behind your closed eyelids and imagining you are going from your energy conversion box to focus 3 are entirely different things. You see, the Wave 1 CD does not in any way induce the OB state. In other words, you cannot simply lie back, think of any old thing, and 10 minutes down the line you float out of the room. All the CD does is to provide an outline structure, and you have to provide the infill. But that's what makes it so effective. The way you provide that infill is to use your imagination. What I thought I'd do, excuse the length, is to give you a rundown of my experience that demonstrates what I mean. Personally, I'm surprised at the lack of support information supplied by TMI. I would have thought some kind of similar rundown example would have been supplied with the CDs. This would at least give people an example to work from, which they could just chop and change to suit. Okay, here goes. Wave 1, CD 1, Track 2, Ocean Surf. Place physical body in a relaxed position. Take a few deep breaths and check head and neck is comfy and properly supported. Then I imagine my sense of conscious awareness is drifting upwards to the top of my consciousness cone. Note, I posted before about how I imagine my consciousness to be a cone with everyday thoughts, actions, etc. at the bottom of the cone, with the start of the astral at the top. Go now to your energy conversion box. I time it so that when I imagine I reach the top of the cone, Monroe says the above. At the top of my consciousness cone is an attic room. At the opposite side to which I enter, there is a doorway marked Border to the Astral in large letters. At the center of the room is a large wooden box. Standing next to the box is Clive, the butler, who helps me lift the lid of the box and remove my physical sheath. We open the lid, and inside is a lower area containing any physical matter concerns, etc. The upper area has a shelf where my physical sheath can lie safely until I next collect it. So I wriggle out of my physical sheath to reveal my body of light. Clive takes the sheath while asking me if I have anything else to deposit in the box, which I hand over as necessary. He lays the sheath out and we close the heavy lid. I walk through the doorway marked Border to the Astral and step outside into the fresh, clean air. The sand underfoot is soft and warm. The atmosphere is comforting. Everything feels secure and familiar. I look behind, and Clive is standing in the doorway, wishing me a safe journey. I thank him for his assistance, and he closes the door. On the outside of the door is marked 2C1 in large letters. Ahead is a pathway composed of inlaid, white stone slabs that contrast with the golden brown of the sand. The path leads to my resonant tuning pyramid. It's a pyramid structure, but with a flat top about 10 feet square and around 10 feet in height. Each of the 4 sides has steps from top to bottom. The structure is made of the same stone as the pathway, and to the right of the pyramid is a large golden-colored harp. Begin now your process of resonant tuning. I time it so that, as Monroe instructs the above, I begin climbing the steps to the top of my resonant tuning pyramid. I sit in the lotus position on a large cushion on the flat top. A helper appears to play the harp and pick the strings that resonate with the sounds on the CD. The whole area vibrates and sings in harmony. Ripples of joy run through me as each string is plucked, and my body of light tingles and glows a pure white. Now relax and breathe normally. At the point where Monroe says the above, I walk down the front steps of the pyramid, take a few more steps forward, and stand on a large inlaid white stone slab marked Declaration Stone. As I do so, a white mist appears in front of me. When it clears, I see a large round structure has arisen from the sand. I walk down the path to a door marked Declaration Room. I enter the room, and I'm right away flanked by 2 saintly-looking people, each dressed in a pure white silk robe. In front of me is a large crystal orb that is glowing with an orange-yellow light. Both sides of the orb facing me are 2 more saint-like people that stand as official witnesses to my declaration. I take a bow and give my declaration. As I do so, the orb begins to pulsate. The color changes and becomes progressively less orange, turning to a brighter and brighter yellow. Then it becomes a pure white as I come to the end of my declaration. At this moment, a door opens to my right. I'm ushered to this doorway and look out. On the ground to my left is a pointed sign saying to Focus 3 in large letters. Looking in the direction of the sign, I can see the Focus 3 archway in the distance. At the same time, Monroe says, "Now you will move to Focus 3. Now Monroe starts the count to Focus 3. While Monroe is talking, I'm acknowledging what he is saying while walking down the stone path towards the F3 archway. I stand on a stone slab and I look down and see deeply and clearly engraved in the stone is F1. Note, this action is timed with the CD, like always. I acknowledge the engraving on the slab by looking at it for a few moments, and then continue walking. Next, I come across another similar slab, only this time the engraving on the stone says F2. Then I walk forwards towards the F3 archway. I time it so that as I stand under the large archway, Monroe says 3 followed by relax and enjoy, etc. At which point I turn around and look back down the path and see the declaration room where I just came from. Then I turn to settle into a large reclining chair that is under the archway. I sit down and look into the distance. I can see my F10 hut sitting on top of a plateau area. A steadily inclining white stone pathway leads to my F10 hut. I relax into the chair and recline it. As I do so, a female helper appears. Now Monroe starts the relaxation process, starting let your jaw relax. As Monroe directs, the female helper massages my head and facial area while I just lie back and enjoy. As Monroe begins saying about letting the relaxation process flow into the brain, I get up and thank my helper, and she wishes me a successful journey. Now I stand outside the archway looking across to my F10 hut. I look down and wiggle my toes as Monroe begins saying, into your toes, etc. As Monroe talks about the relaxation flow from the brain, I imagine myself slowly filling up with a kind of liquid that makes me feel vibrant and totally in tune with my surroundings. I'm going to count now. Now I begin walking along the white stone path towards my F10 hut. Monroe says 4, and I time it so that at that point I'm standing on a slab engraved with F4 in large letters at the top. I look down and acknowledge that I am at F4 by looking at the engraved figures for a few moments. Then, still standing still on the slab, I do the observation and relaxation exercises as Monroe prompts. Then I walk forward some more, and I time it so that when Monroe says 5, I'm standing on a slab marked F5. There I do the exercises Monroe suggests, then do the same with 6, 7, and 8. First acknowledge the engraving on the slab, do the exercises as per Monroe's prompting, and when Monroe is silent between counts, continue walking down the path. Obviously, it takes a short while to learn the CD and get the timing absolutely right. After 9, I continue up the path and arrive at the foot of some stone steps, which lead upwards to the plateau on which my F10 hut is situated. I walk up the steps and see, about 30 yards ahead, is the entrance to my F10 hut. Between this is another embedded stone slab, engraved with a large F10 at the top. I walk forwards, stand on the slab and look down, acknowledging the engraved F10. At this moment, Monroe says 10. Then I go through the prompted exercise, just like before with the previous slabs. Then Monroe repeats the number 10 several times, during which I'm walking towards the entrance of my F10 hut. I open the door, enter the hut, and close the door behind me. I stand for a moment and Monroe says, relax and be calm and comfortable and focus 10. On the opposite wall to the door I came in is a large opening through which is focus 12 and onto the astral proper. The scene through the opening is like a clear night sky with the deep blackness punctuated by millions of stars and planets. Sometimes I just stand and admire the view, listening to Monroe's voice on the CD. Or I may leave the hut and fly around, but not too far as it's easy to get carried away and lose the fact that this is an exercise, the return from which is very important for the exercise as a whole. The return. On one wall of my F10 hut is a door marked Direct Return to C1. On Monroe's prompt, you will return now to full physical waking reality as I count from 10 down to 1. I open the door, walk through into the large tunnel, and close the door behind me. I'm going to count now. Then Monroe says 10. And I look at the door I just walked through, seeing it has entry to F10 written on it, in large letters. Then I start jogging down the tunnel and come to a door marked with a large figure 9. I quickly go through it, no need to close as it's spring-loaded. Jogging along the descending tunnel, I come to a similar door marked 8, then 7, then 6, and onto doorways 5, 4, and 2. Have to be quick here as Monroe doesn't give you much time, but this does greatly add to the effect. Going through doorway 2, I see the opening of the tunnel. I emerge next to the C1 door I stepped out of originally. The C1 door is open, and Clive is beckoning me to hurry. He has my physical sheath ready, which I step into quickly. He welcomes me back and asks if I'd like to take anything else from the box. I say leave it no time, and I descend quickly to ordinary waking consciousness at the bottom of my consciousness cone. This happens just after Monroe says 1. I always think, phew, just made it. Monroe then prompts, wake up, open your eyes, etc. So I do as prompted, in that I actually open my eyes, breathe deeply, and stretch my legs and arms, exactly as Monroe instructs. Wave 1, Q&A quote, 1. In the astral access sequence, how real, vivid, plastically do you need to imagine or see the sequences you describe that lead to entering the astral portal proper and waving goodbye to the butler for a time? E.g., can you imagine it like watching an inner TV screen? Or do you find it more hazy than that and harder to maintain? I think you see the point of the question. At first, it is hard to maintain. The tendency is to drift off on some other more earthbound thoughts. But this goes away with practice. Having the sequences mapped out on the CD is a very helpful tool to practice with. Though if someone wanted to create their own sequence, I guess it would work well too. In which case, I would advise them to plan it out carefully. Write down the script and go through it several times in the physical first. The technique does not require you to first create the meditative, empty mind state, though if a person could already do that, it would be a bonus. The idea is, you flood your mind with other more beneficial thoughts, i.e., those more likely to achieve contact with the astral, as opposed to wondering what you're going to have for breakfast. Ultimately, having some kind of script is what keeps your mind focused on the task in hand. As for how I see these images, they are nowhere near as clear and vivid as the images I eventually see when stepping into the astral realms. These images are as clear as day. It's more like I am sensing an awareness of an image in my mind, rather than seeing the image directly. Astral access sequence is as follows. I get to focus 10 and stand in my F10 hut looking out through the F12 doorway. I generally just stand there gazing at the blackness of the space scene, which is punctuated by all the stars. If nothing happens, then I might fly into the blackness and drift about a bit. If still nothing happens, then I'll come back to the hut and stand looking for a while again, then fly off some more. If the next stage below has not come about after 20 minutes or so, then I will return to C1. I'll give it 5 or 10 minutes, go through the countdown to F10 again, and try for full astral contact once more. I won't try and force things, as doing this is a major retrograde step. There comes a point when I'm standing in the F10 hut, either gazing outwards or just drifting in the blackness, where the blackness takes on a kind of 3D effect. Note, Jeff M's experiences are similar here, so you might find reading over some of his posts helpful. The blackness taking on this 3D effect seems to be the transition between sensing an awareness of the imagery and seeing the images directly, as clear as day, just like I were looking through my physical eyes. This is also the point where I totally lose all sensation of my physical body. Not that I have much by the time I reach focus 10 anyway, but there is always this inkling of a feeling until full astral contact. First, the blackness becomes 3D, followed by a sensation that the blackness is gently swirling around me. Then I normally see whirls of smoky, foggy-looking colors for a few seconds, and sometimes there's a bright light in the distance which is obscured as it shines through the fog. It is at this stage where I mark my intent. On the astral, intent is the energy that drives you into experiencing whatever it is you want to experience. Which sounds ever so easy to say, but I'm currently finding it difficult to learn. Well, as I've said before, my navigation skills were virtually non-existent, and it is only recently that I've started getting the hang of it. Then I find myself projected within the astral proper. Quote, 2. It is clear that dedication and perseverance is a major factor, and one where people might become despondent if no results are forthcoming. Yes, you are quite right. But I also found that belief and doubt are major factors that determine an individual's progress. Any kind of doubt puts a major spoke in the works. Belief is also another factor that can hinder or accelerate a person's progress. The typical scenario a beginner is faced with is the question, how can I believe something that doesn't exist? When I say doesn't exist, I mean not existing on physical plane reality. As such, a person will naturally doubt the whole thing, which is where faith comes into it to a high degree. They may read a book such as AD, where aspects of projection are explained in simple, matter-of-fact terms. This tends to give people confidence in that they too can learn. So they set off just trying some small energy awareness technique. Deep down, They are not really fully believing everything that is written, and they doubt whether they will ever be able to experience even half of what RB has written about. But the book has touched them to the extent they have a little faith in what they are about to do. And naturally, they will be curious. All it takes is for them to make just a little progress, and this will have the effect of increasing their faith and curiosity. So they go in a little deeper, and each time their faith and curiosity increases, and with it their doubts begin to fall away. But an individual doesn't necessarily have to take this approach. The simple way to go from physical A to astral B is to 1. Fully and absolutely believe in the possibility, and 2. Have no doubt that results will be forthcoming. Bit of a tough cookie, I agree. Quote, how long did it take you before the astral portal access sequence progressed from imagination to reality? By reality, I mean to the point where you no longer had to imagine it, but it rather assumed a life of its own, and the astral environment, as entered through the portal, became solid, real, and fluid, i.e., the astral life proper, where everything is happening around you, and you are a part of it, and can interact, communicate, etc. I listened to the CD several hundred times over a period of months, during which time I concocted the imagery for the countdown sequence. It wasn't so much the actual concocting of the imagery that took the time. That's part of it. Only took about 2 weeks to perfect, going through the sequence 2 or 3 times each morning. It was the realization or the idea of going through the countdown in that way, which didn't come to me until I'd been listening to the CD for about 2 months. Once I had perfected the imagery process, my progress began to accelerate quite rapidly. Had I initially begun using the CD, coupled with the imagery I'm using now, I guess it would have taken me about 3 or 4 weeks before the transition to the astral would have become a semi-predictable event, say 6 times in 10 attempts. Quote, 3. Is this astral experience via the astral portal as vivid and real as your previous OBE experiences? Indeed, at the same astral level, people, etc. I also assume that you can retain full recall of the experiences. I really like the term astral portal. I'll use that in future. Thank you. Yes, even more vivid and even more real. Doing what I used to do, i.e. my cannonball projection, is quite a shock to the system. Phasing through an astral portal, by comparison, is a very smooth and controlled transition. As such, it is much easier on the system. Plus, there is no feeling of leaving your physical body, no looking down, seeing yourself on the bed, and so forth. Which is okay for some, but most people who find themselves in that state get scared shotless. In fact, it feels so smooth there is a strong tendency to think it's all just a vivid dream. It's not, of course, because there are distinct differences which I can readily detect as a result of my previous projection experience. Which leads me to your second point. Yes, it's the same place I used to go. Memory recollection is as easy as memory recollection is on the physical. But with one exception, if I fall asleep after the experience. I've trained myself to go back to C1, normal physical consciousness, after any projection experience. But sometimes I get lazy thinking, oh, I'll have a few minutes of sleep then make some notes. Which is fatal, retention-wise. Wave Pointer's quote, here's another thing I was thinking. You seem to be taking to TMI's focus word pretty literally. I don't mean that in a bad way. So I started thinking about F10 and 12. Do you go back to F10 without the CD? By just imagining you are walking through your focus markers and getting to where you are at the F10? And by this time you have focused your attention and feeling in that place and are now, by definition, in F10? Yes, absolutely. That is the whole point of creating the imagery. Otherwise, if Monroe said, return to focus 10, where would you go? What would you do? By having the various mental states linked to particular sets of metaphysical imagery, the answer to the question of what to do or where to go next is obvious and immediate. Quote, the same for F12 would be just getting to your F10 hut and then walking through the door to the F12 space scene. I hope I am not way off, because if this is correct, I might now understand what the TMI trainers meant when they said that you could get to all the states while walking around. Again, yes, absolutely. You are really starting to get the hang of it. The reason why I, personally, have a space scene is because F12 is the first stage of expanded awareness where you leave the physical behind. At F10, I'm still grounded, as it were, in my F10 hut, But the opening in the wall of the hut leads into limitless space. What you can practice is flying out of the opening into the surrounding space while still keeping an eye on the opening you just came through. Then when Monroe instructs you to return to C1, come back to F10 and go through the return procedure as normal. Quote, now when does it happen where you are actually in the astral and not imagining anymore? Does it somehow happen magically, or is there a better way to bring it on? I'm not sure exactly how it will happen with yourself. It could happen in a variety of ways. All I can say for definite is you will know when it happens. What I would do is work on getting to the stage where there is a definite